Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beloved with the Diocese of Atlanta. This is a series that we've started where we publish a video telling a little piece of someone's story and how they understand the concept of belovedness in their life and their faith journey. My name is Ashley Carr, and I host the conversation portion of this endeavor where we sit down with the star of the video and we unpack some of the content there. And today we are here with Holle who is the youth missioner at the Diocese of Atlanta, which means she runs around and makes little disciples and walks with kiddos, or I think we're not supposed to call them kids, right? Walks with students, young people, whatever they are on their journey.
Okay. All of the above.
Holle, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Just some behind the scenes info. Holle and I have spent the last 45 minutes just talking because neither of us were aware of what was happening, and we had a really fun conversation. So we are primed here and ready to talk.
We really are. This is the last sixth of our sixth of our conversation.
So Holle, I loved your video. I thought that you just, it felt really authentic, and it felt like you have a really profound understanding of who you are as a child of God and how that has woven into your life. And one of the first things you say in the video is that you thought that belonging was conditional. And in talking a little bit now, that's still a piece of your story. And I wonder if you might unpack that a little bit for folks.
Sure. So I grew up understanding that the way you relate to God is that you have to pray this prayer, and Jesus comes into your heart, and then you're a Christian. And but fine print. But if you don't change your behavior to conform to the community's values, which at the time you don't understand as the community's values. As the time, it seems like the church is God, right? The church is telling you what God thinks. So if you don't change your behavior to conform to that model, then are you really a Christian? Did it take? And when I was a kid, one of the things as a kid that I was always a class clown, and that was kind of how I created my own sense of social belonging, even though I was intensely shy, and I which no one would believe now, but I remember every week sitting in this back pew and praying for forgiveness because I had gotten in trouble for like being disrespectful or distracting. I also have ADHD, so there was a lot going on there. And I just didn't know why I wasn't changing, And then when I also began to, I didn't really come out to myself until I was an adult, but I knew that I had these thoughts, and that I later realized was an attraction to women, and I didn't know why that wasn't changing. And so this lack of transformation just happening seemed to me like, oh, everyone else has got it figured out and I'm on the outskirts here. And so I have to kind of fake it till I make it and just hope God will eventually let me in so that I can be like everyone else. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was like, oh, everyone in this community who is here in good faith feels that way. And this is just such a case of the emperor's new clothes, where no one is willing to say the emperor is naked. We're all just like, yeah. Like, I love being a Christian. I'm super fulfilled. I'm very joyful. I'm at peace. And I'm miserable because I'm scared that I'm going to burn forever because I didn't pray the prayer the right way, or I didn't mean it enough, or I didn't. So it seemed like salvation was this kind of alchemy that you had to really figure out for yourself. And that really creates a sense of displacement within a community in which you're supposed to belong. So that leaves a mark. And I still live with that today, even though I have this intellectual assent that a lot of the theology I was raised with is not what I would still hold as true.
Well, and it seems to me, in the little that I know about you, that you're just an intense truth teller, and that's such a really, really invaluable quality to have as somebody in any kind of religious leadership. I think, where you're saying the things that we're all thinking, and that's really important, I think, with youth, to create safe space for that kind of questioning and wrestling. And so, silver lining to that.
There's definitely a silver lining. I think my journey is learning how to control that a little more. There are times where it's not quite the right room.
Understand. Yeah.
But yeah, I think youth ministry, what's so fascinating about the last several generations of youth. So I'm an elder millennial, so I'm right on the line of Gen X and millennial. What's really interesting to me is that as youth become less enamored with the institution of church, they're still really thrilled by the movement of church. Right. And the movement of church requires a lot of authenticity and a lot of nakedness emotionally and spiritually. And I think that's how I found the movement of church. And so it's kind of that thing of like, you just can't help but want to keep building into that safety of no one's okay. We're functioning, and life has its deep joys. But we're all dealing with our stuff.
You talked in the video about doing, quote, serious business with God and a therapist to engage questions of your identity and mental health. And I wonder if you can kind of unpack the how to have serious conversations with God or do serious business with God. Like, what did that look like for you? And, anybody else who's sort of out there in the same position, like, I think a lot of people get sort of paralyzed because they don't know how to bring this to God, and what does that conversation look like? And I have some ideas based on what I know about you, but will you talk a little bit about that, what that conversation looked like with God?
I think the first thing for me, and I would never want to be prescriptive to say copy and paste this, but I do think this is valuable for anyone who's struggling with that sense of fear of acknowledging a reality before God. It's first understanding that what is God's voice? I think depending on which tradition you're raised in, in a religious sense, like I was taught that the meanest voice in my head was God.
Oh, wow.
And so any kind of intense shame, well, that's conviction. That's the Holy Spirit. And I had a wonderful therapist who was also he was a licensed therapist, had gone to grad school for it, but was also a pastor and had done his MDiv. His name's Dave Lutz. He's in Seattle, which is where I lived for about a decade. He said to me, God is the perfect parent. And if you saw a parent talking to a child the way you think God is talking to you, what would you do? And I was a mandated reporter, so I was like, honestly, I would call DFACS because the God in my head, I've called it the God with teeth. It's this sense of, well, I learned that love was this thing that had to hurt. And so first things first is really understanding that God is love. Those are synonymous words. You can use them. If you can use them interchangeably, you should be able to use them interchangeably. And if you need a crash course on love, 1 Corinthians is a great way to go. But yeah, so I think first is going, okay, what would I be okay with seeing a parent, the way a parent speaks to a young child? And once I began to sort that out, the suspension of shame in my head became a priority. Because there's guilt, right? And guilt is okay. I think if you think of it as an analog to physical pain,
Yeah.
pain is good because it can tell us when something is wrong. If you break your leg and you don't feel pain, you're going to have much more serious complications down the road. Likewise, if you're a hypochondriac and you're always feeling pain, it's going to impact the way you're able to move through the world. And so having an appropriate relationship with guilt versus shame. I'm fine with guilt. It's a byproduct of me just kind of goofing my way through life. Shame has no place in my head. As a child of God, it just doesn't. And so I really began to focus on teasing that out. That was the first step. Once you do that and you begin to think of God as the perfect parent, not in some abstract way, but in how would you actually see someone perfectly parenting? Parenting a child that isn't afraid, that is able to be authentic, that is able to trust their parent and know that there's consistency there, there's care there, the parent is acting in the child's best interest. That really changes the way you interact with God in your head. And so once that happened for me, I was able to really see myself in a new light and not just see myself as this dirty, disgusting creature that, you know, oh my gosh, God is he's just such a pal to like overlook the fact that I'm a dumpster fire. It became this thing of, I am 100% sinner and I am 100% a child of God. And that is always going to be the case. So how can I now lean into the joy and the beauty of living a life of love? And that includes loving myself.
I love that. That is really, really beautiful. And I have nothing to say because that's just, you said everything perfectly. So well done. Thank you. I think that's, I think that's just so spot on and really helpful. So I want to pivot a little bit. We're in the season of Advent, which I think a lot of people forget about right here. But once we get to the fourth Sunday in Advent, it's like, fourth what?
It's basically Christmas, right?
Yeah. Can we just skip the hymns and go to the Christmas carols? And I wonder if Advent, I mean, so it sounds like you came up in a setting where liturgical calendar probably wasn't a huge piece of your
no
for me.
No.
So since you now learn what Advent is and what is it a rich season for you? What is the season like for you in your journey?
It is a rich season. You know, my favorite name for God is Emmanuel. And that sense of God putting, Bishop Wright will say, God putting on, human skin, clothing himself in human skin, clothing God's self in human skin. That sense of the God who comes to us is really, I mean, that's the crux of my understanding of God now.
Yes.
And that any kind of relationship with God, I see evangelism more as I'm not bringing people to Jesus. I'm helping people see that Jesus has already come to them.
Yeah.
And that there is a Christ nature in you that is kind of the source code for your humanity. Yeah. And now we get to engage that and align with God. And so Emmanuel, God with us, is the first step of that, because it is God coming to us. And like I said in the video, not just coming to us, but coming to the least of us first.
Those pesky shepherds. They're my favorite.
Absolutely.
They're my favorite characters in this
yeah. Oh, totally. That story just stuck with me, thinking of shepherds, because you grow up with a Sunday school understanding of shepherds as like, they get to play with sheep all day and whatever. And it's like, you don't realize like, oh no, they were seen as like thieves and criminals and, and that's where God shows up first. And I love that. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that God.
Yeah. No, I loved what you said about how, our God isn't shiny, isn't a shiny, clean God who can't go to the dark places, and that that firsthand is, so powerful. You've been, I think I think any human, with anybody who struggles with mental illness, or you're just alive, right? I mean, we all see darkness, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the most terrifying piece of that darkness is the solitude, or the sense of solitude. And so, I love that you said that you were there and God was with you. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of the flip side of that, about the joy moments. Are you aware of the presence of God just as much when you're overflowing with joy as you are in the depths of despair? I know that it's actually harder for me to see God in the joy sometimes, and so I wonder what you say about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I'm not old. I'm still in my 30s. Thank you. But although the students I work with would beg to differ.
Right.
But I'm 38. So I would say the last few years I have started to experience more of that joy and meeting God there. I love laughing. I love joking. I've dabbled in stand-up comedy for a while. I just love that sense of laughter, and it's one of the only involuntary reactions we have
Yes.
to, like, as adults, that is socially acceptable.
Right.
And so I really, I find God in laughter a lot. And I think as I keep learning about Jesus and keep picturing his humanity and how that is fertile soil for his God nature,
Yeah. Yes.
I think of Jesus as someone who was pretty cheeky and had some good laughs, and so I do enjoy that. And then I also, I've also found, kind of in the last couple of years, this is where it's been a little bit of a change. I've always liked laughing, but the quiet joy has been kind of new in my life. And so the last few years, just being able to, with my ADHD, engage in some more contemplative practices whenever my brain will allow me to.
Right.
That I find joy with my dog. I find joy on the hiking trails. I find joy in a really delicious meal, and connecting to people and seeing the youth be absolute, their most ridiculous selves. I just think, gosh, in a universe the size of ours, in a galaxy the size of ours, in a world the size of ours, how fortunate am I to be aware right now of the beauty of the people around me and the connection that we get to have over, any of the things I just mentioned.
Yeah.
There's just something so holy in that. And so that's where I'm always trying to learn to see more joy, because I tend to be hypercritical and can kind of focus on what we need to do better. And so I'm grateful that that's been coming into my life more and more.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I mean, the reason I wanted to ask you about that is because it seems like you've got sort of, you touch on your story touches on a lot of points that I think are true for everyone, right? But a lot of times when there's a darkness in our story, when there's hard times, when we've hit rock bottom, that becomes our whole story, and we sort of box ourselves into that. And this is who I am, and I want to be careful to tell the whole story, and to make sure that people know that you can come out of that. You may go back in, and I mean, it's fluid, right? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what you just said is so crucial, because this is not a linear development.
Right.
Earlier this week, so today's the 16th of December, Monday and Tuesday of this week, I thought, I'm so lonely. I'm really struggling. There aren't a ton of really pressing things for me to do, so I don't have the structure of urgency.
Yeah.
I'm kind of forced to rest, which is harder for me sometimes, and I'm forced to just be with myself, and that's hard.
Right.
I still have those days, but I know that they're days.
Right.
I know that there's going to be some good days coming too. And so I think that makes all the difference.
I love that. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, we're going to
Thank
get in
you.
trouble for talking too long, but before we go, I want to ask you
Always.
one last question. What does beloved mean to you?
Beloved and belonging to me are synonymous. Beloved means I have a home in you. I have a home with somebody, and that there's nothing I can do that's going to make that home go away. I think that I think we're so bound up by time and endings. And endings often feel like evictions because we build our home in the present moment. But to build a home in love and in the God of love, and to know that that home never goes anywhere, that we always have a place to return, that we always have a place where that's where the hearth fire is. That's what beloved means to me.
I love that. Thank you. And I guess I should clean out my guest room because it sounds like you're going to show up at my house just anytime and
I'm
make
on my
yourself
way.
at home. Okay. Sister in Christ. Holly Tubbs, thank you so, so much for being with us today. Your story is remarkable, and I feel really honored to hear it. And I'm so grateful that you're out there telling it with such authenticity and just unbridled truth, and that's just really refreshing in
Well,
church. So thank
I've so enjoyed talking to you for the last hour and especially the last few minutes. So thank you so much.
Everyone will be back in the new year with a new beloved story, and until then, go out into the world and remember that you are beloved, and remember to be love wherever you go. See you next time. Bye.